menopause and perimenopause didn't make you ADHD. You are born with it. It's genetic. By the time they hit their 40s, they're often so resilient in so many ways and have so much perseverance, so many skills, but there's always a hidden cost.
I felt like I understood a part of myself that I didn't know, especially the labels.
This is more than a book. This is not a book. This is a movement to change this narrative and change the story for so many women. Whether you're on HRT, whether you're on ADHD meds, you've got to think about all the other things, nervous system regulation, diet, gut microbiome, understanding your brain and having that self-compassion and validation to know that you're not just lazy or ditzy or losing your mind. It's all part of how your brain's wired.
There's not many books in this world that change your life, and this is one of them. Hello and welcome back to the Pressing Play podcast. This is such a special one, and I was just saying earlier, I am slightly fangirling because there's not many books in this world that change your life, and this is one of them. And I think so many people are going to resonate with this book. Today, we are diving into the topic that so many women are talking about right now, ADHD and perimenopause. And how many times have you found yourself right now that you're unraveling, you're questioning yourself, and you're saying, is it ADHD? Is it perimenopause? Oh, my loves. Joining me is Dr. Helen Wall, a trusted GP, a menopause specialist, a public health leader, and author of this incredible book, Menopause and ADHD, How to Navigate Hormone Flux and Neurodivergence. Through her work supporting women and advocating for better healthcare, she's helping shine a light on the often overlooked connection between hormone changes and neurodivergence. Today, we're talking about why so many women are questioning ADHD in midlife and the impact of hormone fluctuations on the brain and the hidden cost of masking, and how those beliefs that we have in childhood can shape our experience today. Thank you so much, Dr. Helen, for being on the pod.
Honestly, when people say things like that, I always feel so weird because I've got massive imposter syndrome.
Not at all. You are incredible. And even how you wrote this book is so helpful because you also really understand that people who do have ADHD with memory and concentration, you've even created a book that helps you understand themselves better by breaking it down into the long, the science that we need, the help, but also there's just little bites at the outtake at the end so we can just understand what's going on per chapter. I've loved this book so much. Thank you. First, okay. You. Tell me, I feel like I speak every week to women, every week, either it's in the WhatsApp chat, it is with clients, and they're questioning whether they have ADHD or perimenopause, and it's all coming up now. I'd like to just start, let's just jump straight in. Why is it that perimenopause is bringing this to the surface?
Well, I think there's multiple layers to unpack there, really, Jo. I think, for years, women have gone missed with all forms of neurodivergence. So they've been misdiagnosed, they've been mislabeled, fobbed off, dismissed. Societal terminology around women, they're scatty, they're ditzy, they're, this and that. All the things that we wouldn't necessarily choose to put on a boy in terms of their sort of labeling and language has been historically how women and girls have been brought up. And I think because of that, we've missed the opportunities to see neurodivergence, particularly ADHD, in women and girls. They're not the hyperactive boy in the classroom that's, running about, can't sit still. Very often, I mean, this is a generalisation, they're very often the girl who's trying to fit in, who's inattentive in her mind, hyperactive in her mind, not able to switch off, but internally restless. And, she can lose focus and she can be labelled as ditzy or dippy or, can't stay focused. And all of those things go with them through life. And girls are very good at learning to fit into society. And we program them like that. We want them to be good girls and sit quietly and not be disruptive. And therefore they start building this scaffolding around them, which is basically a mask. So they learn to be good in public and those spaces. And what parents who come to see me as a GP will often say is, the school say she's absolutely perfectly behaved, she's perfect pupil, she's perfectionist, and then she comes home and she completely goes into meltdown.
Mhm.
That's because that's her safe space. She's spent all day in this world where she's having to perform almost. It's exhausting. And I think girls have done that for a long time and they've become women that do that. And then what happens in perimenopause is so many things get landed on us. We all know about the mental load of women and what we carry. But the difference I think now is that we carry all of that alongside being leaders in the workplace and
Yeah.
entrepreneurs running businesses, working effectively in many forms equal to men, carrying the mental load, and then our
Mm.
hormones start to change as well, and that has a significant effect on our brains. And we know that the chemical messengers in our brain are significantly affected by changing hormone levels, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in
No,
medicine. We don't talk about it with girls when they're growing up. We
no.
certainly don't talk about it in sort of the general population, and that's something I'm hoping to change.
Yeah. And you are in spades with your absolutely incredible book. And it's so interesting when you're talking about childhood because the school system isn't set up for
No.
hormonal fluctuations. I mean, and we'll go through more like what is ADHD, what is perimenopause, but if, for instance, you start your cycle around exam time and you have to sit in an exam with that concentration, I can imagine that can have a real effect on your childhood and those beliefs. And then also taking them further into that meeting where you're suddenly standing up to present or do something and you feel yourself having that same thing again with concentration or memory or brain fog. So it's really triggering that it doesn't get diagnosed sooner.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
imagine you see that a lot within your work.
Yeah, and, I'm gonna be really honest, I think I mentioned this in my book. I didn't see it
Mm,
for a long time. I
mm,
didn't see it in a lot of
yeah,
women. I've been a GP for 17, 18 years in the same practice, a doctor for a lot longer, and I've seen the same women throughout their life course from being teenagers, they're
yeah,
now in their,
yeah,
30s and 40s, and I suddenly realised in some of them that all those times they kept coming back with treatment-resistant anxiety, depression, things that were going a bit off-piste in their life, things when they felt like their mind was just sort of completely imploding, be it post-pregnancy, be it puberty, be it
mhm,
perimenopause, be it just the general implosion of the things that we carry as
yeah,
women in life, juggling everything. Um, yeah, I didn't always see the underlying thread, which in some of them was ADHD or neurodivergence more generally. And um, yeah, I think once you've seen it, it's really hard to unsee it. But the problem is so few people manage to see it at this point in society.
yeah. Completely agree. It's not something that is talked about. It's not something that's discussed in schools. It's something that can feel fobbed off. But it's a really important part because there is that hidden cost of masking, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's what
And
I always say.
yeah,
There's always a hidden cost.
mm,
Women will often say, everybody thinks everyone around them, because I think historically we've thought of neurodivergence as something negative and that people are, not a functioning member of society and they're not getting on with it with their lives. But actually a lot of the women I come across have been hugely, massively functioning and successful in their lives. Because they are so, brilliant at juggling so many things and moving from task to task, and so creative and so innovative. And they develop so much resilience through their lives because they're basically swimming against the tide. They're having to function in a school system that was designed for the neurotypical brain, often in workplaces that are designed for the neurotypical brain, in society situations that are designed for that. So by the time they hit their 40s, they're often so resilient in so many ways and have so much perseverance, so many skills, but there's always a hidden cost. I always tell the tale of a
mm,
lady that said to me, she had a massively brilliant career. She was a lawyer. She was working in the city. She was doing, she was flying high. All the family and friends thought she was doing amazing, and she was doing amazing. But she sat and she cried and she said, "The problem is that I've had to put so much effort into that. Like, I've had to every night when I know I've got a meeting or anything serious the next day, I've got to prepare for 3 hours. I've got to rehearse what people are gonna say. I've got to rehearse what people might ask me. I've got to, try and, like, get in that mindset. The cost of that to her was that she hadn't had a relationship for 8 years. She was now in her early 40s and was worried she was never gonna have children, and now those things are important to every woman. But they were important to her, and she'd missed out on that, she felt, and I think that's really
Mhm.
sad because there's always a price that's been paid by the woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about in the book about burnout, and
Yeah.
that you see that there's a lot of burnout in women as they are having to mask their symptoms, and then they hit the perimenopause, and we'll go further into the brain in a bit later. Um, if someone's listening now, and I've had a few people message me prior to you coming on the podcast today, and they
Okay.
would just said, and oh yeah, I've had quite a lot of people message me with their questions, which I love, and I feel like the most common question that keeps coming up is, what's the difference between perimenopause, if you can, I know, and ADHD? I was wondering whether there, and I know it's all in the book and you go into it in detail, is there someone who's listening right now thinking, I feel like that could be me?
I knew that was gonna be I knew that was gonna be the key question because that's the
Yeah.
question I get the most, not just
Do you
from
really?
women, but from other clinicians as well. What's
Mm.
been really, really great in many ways, but also, I didn't expect it was the number of clinicians that have picked up this book or sort of heard about the book and said, "I'd never realized there was a connection,"
Yeah.
which has been amazing for me. But they often ask that question as well. And I think it can be very, very confusing. And it feels like a minefield. It is a minefield. But what I always say to women is, you know, menopause and perimenopause didn't make you ADHD. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. You are born with it, it's genetic. Whether you know it or not, through your childhood, through your earlier adult years, you always had ADHD. The problem is, or maybe not the problem, but the thing is you have probably likely masked that. So you may not have realized yourself all through those years that you had ADHD. But what most women are able to feel is that they always felt slightly different, like there was something not quite as easy for them as for other people around them, or as that fit in that as well as other people around them. They sort of had that inner feeling, but they just sort of glossed over it because they were coping, they were managing, and they were doing okay in life. But every now and again, it reared its head. And it may likely have reared its head in puberty. It may more likely have reared its head when you were pregnant or after you've given birth. When those hormones change, it's a key time for it to pop up. But you may not have realised what it was, what that underlying thread of thing was throughout your life. I think the biggest thing for me is for women to think back and think, if this is something that, you've gone your life, you've always felt like everything's been okay, you fitted in, you've done what you can do. Of course, we all have our own challenges, neurodivergent or neurotypical.
Mm.
And you get to menopause and suddenly you feel like you can't think straight and your hormones are not right and you're feeling not yourself. That is normal menopause, perimenopause. Hormones will change how we feel. And so many women will say to me, I just don't feel like myself. That can absolutely be the sole change in hormones because it affects every woman's chemical messengers in her brain, not just if you've got neurodivergence. Um, but if you are somebody who can recognize that throughout your life, you perhaps have had some of these differences. You perhaps have been inattentive, you perhaps have been internally hyperactive, restless, not able to, stick on task or complete task, etc., etc. And as you say, it's all in the book. Then you get to perimenopause, and the things that helped you cope before, so the scaffolding that you'd put in, the strategies you put in place, knowingly or unknowingly, suddenly collapse because your brain can't take that extra strain of the hormones now impacting your
Yeah.
chemical brain messengers. Then, there's likely something else underlying that. And I think when I explain it to women and clinicians like that, they kind of see that it's not something that just pops up in perimenopause and menopause, but it's whether you can recognize it throughout the rest of your life.
Yeah. And this is what this book did. I'm not going to turn this into my own personal therapy session, but when I read your book and I messaged you, I found this so emotional because I recognize so much of myself in this. And especially, I felt like I understood a part of myself that I didn't know, and especially the labels that I, ditzy, scatty, and I always feel that I have had to work that little bit harder to fit in, or when I have felt overexcited to be too much to dial myself down. And I do anyone who feels that too, and more just to read this. And that's how I love it was written, because you read, I found I read your book, put it down, took a breath, went back to it, read it again. And then when the end, when you put the notes at the end, just to really help embody what you're saying. And I really, yeah, I really, really felt, I'm holding it to my heart. I really, really felt this as I was reading it. It's going to help so many women. What inspired you to write this book?
It was a combination of things really. When I was 41, my brain suddenly stopped working. Like, I'd always been
Mm,
really, well, I guess the outside world would always say I'd always been really academic and really
hmm.
clever, but I'd worked really hard. Like, I was the kind of student at medical school who was, and this sounds real, I sound like a real loser now, but this is absolutely true. Like, I was waiting for the library to open in the morning, and I would
Who are
be leaving
you?
as it closed at night, before exam period,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
studying. The people would be in the pub, and I mean, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, I partied hard as well, but there were points when, I had to really put effort in. And I just wanted to be a doctor so much from being little that, this was my, like, goal, and I was so determined. And, I failed my first year in medical school exams, and I had to keep going. I got a D in my chemistry in A level in one of my modules. I
Good.
had to redo it, so it's not come easy to me. But I've always been quite, everybody sort of she's switched on. I've done
Mm,
that in my career. And then I got to 41 and suddenly my brain just wouldn't work.
yeah.
It just totally, like, stopped functioning. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't word find. I couldn't do things that I'd done before at speed or pace.
Yeah.
I was struggling to juggle the mental load of being a mum of 3, working full time,
Mhm.
which I've always done, home, etc. And it took me probably about 6 months. I was started having hot sweats and night sweats, and I suddenly thought to myself, "Gosh, I think this might be perimenopause."
Mm,
And I went to my GP, and basically my GP just laughed it off and said, "You're too young. Like, you're still having a period. You're too young. It's not
yeah.
perimenopause." Um, and I think that was a real eye opener for me because I thought, if a woman who's a GP and
Mm,
a women's health specialist cannot get HRT,
yeah.
like, God help every other
Exactly.
woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was that, and I went privately and I got HRT, and my brain just, like, almost recovered. Like, within a couple of months, I was back to my normal self. I beat myself up for a long time about having HRT because I kept believing myself, perhaps you are too young, you're just imagining it. So, I went through all that same emotions that I know women go through, even as a GP. And then what happened was, around about a similar time, a few months after, my daughter, who'd always struggled at school, not quite been able to focus, etc., um, she she was diagnosed with dyslexia, and then when she was doing her GCSEs, with her puberty hit, everything just, like, her executive function of her brain, her emotional regulation,
Yeah.
uh, and long story short, she was ended up being diagnosed ADHD. And I started to sort of understand ADHD a lot better because I did a lot of research because of her. And then sort of this link between, could hormones, because she'd gone through puberty, I'd gone through perimenopause, did how much did hormones actually impact our
Mm.
brains? Which, we never get taught at medical school. I've never been taught at medical school that hormones impact your brain. Like, I was a 43-year-old woman at this point,
Mm.
having to look up and read about whether hormones impact anything in our brain. How ridiculous is that?
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually is. And I started to realize that there was things here, and then I started to see it in my patients. I was running a menopause clinic at the time.
Mhm.
Started to see in my patients this thing happening where they could go back through time and say, "Well, last time I felt like this is when I just had a baby." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, there's definitely a pattern." So all these patterns were like, I was pattern spotting. I was researching at the same time, and then I just started talking about it on Instagram. I didn't have a particularly big following at the time on Instagram.
Mhm.
I'd done a little bit of TV work, and people kept asking me to set up an Instagram channel. And I just started, just really sort of openly just talking about it. Has anybody
Yeah.
else noticed this? Has anybody else noticed that when they hit perimenopause, their brain stopped functioning?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and it just exploded, like, almost overnight. Like, women just came, like, in flocks, and they were messaging me, telling me their experiences, they were commenting on the stories, I was researching more, I was putting more of that online, they were sort of really engaged in it, and it just went and went, and then Penguin got in touch and said, there's clearly, like, a need for women to have this information. Can we
Mhm.
put it all in a book? And I was like, yeah, let's
Wow.
put it all in a book. And that's where the book was born. So I haven't got a diagnosis of ADHD. There's
Mhm.
plenty that would say I should have one. And I certainly felt the impact of my chemical messengers dying off
Mm,
when my estrogen started to change. Um, but yeah, I'd just seen so many women who've been impacted by this that I think when you're in that room with that woman in front of you and she suddenly feels seen, it's
yeah,
such an emotional moment, it's so yeah, it's just such an emotional point, and I think, I've written this book from the heart, it's a
yeah,
labour of love really because I've had contact from so many women, I've seen so many women now, um, and yeah, it is a huge, huge issue, and I think I've had a lot of pushback from some, when I've been doing my own PR of the book,
mm,
a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, it's a niche topic that, it's quite niche, like, we're not going to cover that, it's niche." It went to number 1 bestseller, Menopause, and stayed there for the first 2 weeks on Amazon, and it was 50 copies off a Sunday Times bestseller. That's how niche this topic is.
yeah.
So
Exactly, exactly.
I
Congratulations,
did,
congratulations.
well, I think it's more that it's not about me, this is not about me, this is about getting the bigger message out there. I did a book launch, and I didn't want to do a book launch 2 weeks before
Mm,
it up because I was so worried that no one would turn up. I've got huge imposter syndrome. Anyway, my family and friends were like, "You've got to do something. You've got to do something." So I contacted a local bookshop and I was like, "Can we have a bit of like a book sign or something like that?" Anyway, 30 women came from all over the country. Some of them had travelled like 4
wow,
hours, and it was so emotional. Like the emotion in that room, they told their stories of their journeys, how like they've been not seen, not heard for so long, and
yeah,
the effect, the cost that had had
yeah,
to them. Yeah, it was so hugely, hugely emotional. And I left that book launch thinking, this is more than a book. This
yeah,
is not a book. This is a movement to change the narrative and change the story for so many women because I'll be damned. I don't know if I've got ADHD or not, and I'm not sure I'll ever find out. But I'm damned if I'm going to sit here and let my daughter get to perimenopause and menopause and be in this situation. It's not
yeah.
happening.
No, no, not on your watch. And
No.
just so many people and women that you are helping with this to feel seen. How many times do we just blame ourselves as women? How many times do we keep that label stuck on from childhood? How many times do we just suddenly question ourselves and we play ourselves down? And how many missed opportunities are there because we feel that there's actually something wrong with us? And this is a movement. This is more than a book. And you can see on your Instagram account, we'll put everything in the show notes for everybody to buy the book, to find you, to follow you. It's helping so many women and they can find themselves through the work that you do. It is so powerful and it's just such a empowering book. And it's so loving and caring inside. It's not a book where you're going to read it and feel scared. It's empowering. And there's tools that you can help yourself and it understands what actually is happening because you just want to understand yourself better. Because when it comes to hormonal changes, I mean, I've learned about periods. I remember, I'm born in the 80s, but they just stuck a tampon in a piece of glass and this tampon exploded. And I remember going,
Yeah. What the hell is that? Yeah.
I was like, what is going on? And I think maybe my sex education was an animal. Like, I don't know what is happening. But
I
and
know.
also and also in the movies, it's like get married, the end. Like, no, there's more to life. And this is all about what pressing play is about. It's like bringing guests on just like you who help us with that press play energy to move forward, that you have this mission from your heart. And with pressing play, I have a piece about dopamine and it's boosting dopamine about joy, connection, and women to really feel empowered in themselves. In perimenopause, especially in ADHD, how important is dopamine?
Wow. I mean, it's just massive, isn't it? And I think, ADHD in itself, the key difference with ADHD is the ADHD brain has different or altered
Mm.
dopamine signaling. So at one point in time, we used to say, oh, ADHD brains are chasing dopamine. I think that's probably a little bit oversimplified now and a bit outdated. But we know that, ADHD brains have dopamine, but they often doesn't read it the same. So the receptors are not receptive enough to
Yeah.
it. The signaling's not as spot on. So yes, in the simplest sense of the word, ADHD brains are chasing dopamine. So if something
Mm.
is exciting, if something is, gets your brain ticking, then you're going to do that. So that's why they're very
Mm.
good at hyper focusing on things that give them joy and give them passion. Not great at starting tasks that are boring,
Yeah.
or don't lead anywhere. If you're in a crisis and you need, if you're in a crisis or you've got a tight deadline, you need an ADHD person by your
Yeah.
side because they thrive in that. They thrive on deadlines. They thrive in crisis. They do their
Yeah.
best work when the pressure is on because they're getting that dopamine hit from. So there is a lot about dopamine there. And I think, in menopause as well, we know that estrogen is very important to our dopamine levels. So estrogen, again, we used to say, it boosts. I'm saying we used to say, we've never said any of this, but, if we're going to say it, we used to be very, well, the research that there is was very oversimplified to start with. And it said, that estrogen boosts dopamine. Again, that is probably an oversimplification, but we need estrogen to help with the dopamine signaling in our brain. And when estrogen goes AWOL, so in perimenopause, it's fluctuating all over the place, and in menopause, it's dying off, for want of a better term. Then that's going to impact on our dopamine stability and our dopamine signal in our brain. So, yeah, I think it's a massive, massive part of this phase in our lives, and I think, I used to when I first started down this road of doing this work, I thought this was an NHS issue.
Mhm.
I thought that, it was just an NHS issue that we were missing all these women and we weren't seeing them and we weren't diagnosing it. We weren't picking up on the changes in hormones in the brain. But I get messages from women all over the world, like globally. This is
Mm.
not an NHS issue. This is a
Yeah.
women's health issue that is
Yeah.
globally not talked about. We talk about female hormones in how they affect our reproductive organs. It's very siloed. We talk about fertility, periods, pregnancy, etc. What we don't talk about is how it impacts our brain, and it definitely impacts not just our dopamine, but also our noradrenaline signaling, our GABA, glutamate, like loads of different messengers, chemical messengers in our brain. It's really important, and progesterone again affects our GABA
Yeah.
receptors in our brain, which helps with our sort of calming brain centers. So yeah, and we don't talk about it. We never taught it in medical school. We're not taught it in GP training. I'm not sure anyone's taught it, to be fair.
No, I know.
I'd love to hear
No,
if anybody's suffering.
it's not a thing we do, and we take those hormones for granted until something then you feel like you're glitching, and I always think, "Poor little progesterone." I don't feel like progesterone gets enough love, like, you don't
I
realise
know, I
progesterone
know.
and
I
then you don't
felt like I
realise how.
stuck it in there because I thought, we're giving estrogen all the glory here.
No, but I'm glad you did because of progesterone. We don't appreciate it, but then you don't think to GABA, and it's like, why am I suddenly so anxious? It's like it's progesterone because it is in the head, and you talk about it so much. There's so much. I'm a science geek. There's so much science in the book. People, you will absolutely love it. I'm just really conscious of time. I was going to just talk about HRT and ADHD together. What is your take on HRT and medication when it comes to ADHD?
Yeah, so I think the difficulty we have is we don't have any research on, what's the benefit of HRT and
Mm.
ADHD. Everything we've got is anecdotal and experience based, which in itself is, it's not doesn't make it wrong. Um, we've got the theory, so we know that the fluctuating levels of hormones in perimenopause and the dwindling levels in menopause impact on those chemical messengers that we've talked about in our brain. So it makes sense that if we can stabilize those with some HRT, then we can stabilize the chaos in the brain as well. And I think that works very well in the women that I've seen in this situation. I think HRT has helped to stabilize things. I think it's difficult to find one thing with ADHD, particularly in this phase of life,
Mm.
that's going to help. You've got to have all sort of the bits of the jigsaw in together. So,
Yeah.
and I say this to all women, whether they've got ADHD or not, with menopause, in my menopause clinic, I say, there's no amount of HRT that I can give you that's going to fix everything because if your diet's not great, or you're drinking too much alcohol, or you're just running on empty, you're constantly stressed and burnt out, which so many women in this point of life are, all the HRT, I could literally ship in bucket loads of HRT for you, and
Yeah,
it's not gonna make you feel amazing. It will
totally
help,
agree.
'cause it's gonna stabilize those hormones a little bit and take that pressure off, but we've gotta think about all the layers, that of health and then how we and well-being, and, it's the same for ADHD. Some women do really well on ADHD meds. I've had women say to me they're life-changing. Those are the women who don't never go down that road. They don't want to
Mm,
go down the road of even an ADHD diagnosis, let alone medication. And it's what's right for you. It's what feels right for you and what you need in that moment. But whether you're on HRT, whether you're on ADHD meds, you've got to think about all the other things. Nervous system regulation, diet, gut microbiome. Because we know now that, there's more and more evidence coming about that as well, about how it helps with our estrogen recycling and all our serotonin. Often is most of our serotonin is made in the gut. That's the
yeah,
helps with our brain, mental health. So, there's so much more to it than just going on HRT or going on ADHD medication. And I think a huge part of this is just understanding your brain and having that self compassion and validation to know that you're not just lazy or ditzy or losing your mind. It's all part of how your brain's wired. And I think for me the biggest difficulty that women have is not with their ADHD, it's with trying to live as though they haven't got ADHD.
yes. Oh, that's powerful. Yeah,
I think when a woman accepts, yeah, I've got ADHD, this is how my brain works, these are the things I'm really good at because of my ADHD brain, these are the things that I struggle with a bit more because my brain's not wired that way,
yeah,
and then manages the environment around that and manages to work with it rather than against it, that can be so, so therapeutic. But the problem is by the time we pick these women up, they're often so burnt out and so down in the imploded with everything that's just gone on, that it's really hard for them to see and be motivated enough to do that work.
yeah,
So I hope
yeah.
that this mission will help women know what's coming and prepare for that rather than end up sort of in that burnout phase, time and
Definitely. Definitely. And you have some fantastic tools in this book as well of how you can empower yourself. And it's like having that menu, isn't it? Pick what works well for you. And maybe what works for you in your cycle, or if you're not whatever, there's something that there's so much information in there. I love nervous system work. So I am an EFT practitioner. I do tapping for 9 years. I've always found that when I've had on myself, but also with clients when I've been tapping, the minute we start tapping and their nervous system goes out, you can just see them regulate. The ideas come, the creativity comes. There's so much tools that you can help yourself. What would you say if someone's listening now, like the three things they can do to help themselves, like lifestyle changes, or maybe it's not three. I'm just giving you like a top three. What do you? You can do more if you want to.
So, I would say one of the first things I would say is externalize your brain. ADHD brains don't do well when it's cluttered with things to do and things to think about, etc. So get everything out on paper, whether that's a planner on your wall, whether it's a book, whatever. Write everything down. Don't try and hold it all in your mind because that's when you sort of just become really overwhelmed.
Yeah,
That's sort of the practical thing. I would then say, look at your diet. I think so many of us, when especially when we're so busy as mums and wives, and often we've got elderly parents we're looking after, etc., and we sort of grabbing food on the go. We're not really thinking about it. Try and do a little bit of work on your gut microbiome. So it's really, if you go to the letter, it says to eat 30 plant foods a week and take probiotics and prebiotics. I think that's quite overwhelming for people, but I think anything you can do, even if that's just cutting out a bit of processed food, ultra processed food, adding a few more greens to your diet. I think we underestimate how much better we can feel by doing that. And then the third thing, so that's sort of your diet, your physical thing. And then the third thing really, I think, is just find a practice that helps with your nervous system regulation, whether that's going outside for a walk, whether that's learning some mindfulness, whether it's learning to meditate, yoga, whatever helps. Find one thing that's going to help just bring you down from that high place. Because I think if you can do those three things, then already you'll be in a much better place, whether you go for HRT or ADHD meds.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have one question I ask everybody, and it's your last question. Um, what are you pressing play on next?
I am, basically, I'm not stopping with this. I'm on a mission now. I'm on a mission to make everybody aware of the effect of female hormones on our brains, whether that's to do with ADHD or just to do with general wellness and mental health. So yeah, I've set up a community called Finally Seen, which people can join on my website. And it's basically just going to be sending out information, but hoping to get a few call to actions as well. My next thing I'm going to do is contact the medical schools with Freedom of Information Act to ask what they're teaching about this.
Fantastic. You're not just helping women now, but it's generations to come.
I
And I'm
hope
sure
so.
there's so many. I'm sure there's so many mothers out there that are recognizing their ADHD from their children. And I think it's having these tools that can help and support them. I so grateful you're here. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Pressing Play
Well, thank
podcast.
you for having me. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Okay, press stop.